Hello, my beautiful disasters. Welcome back to the channel. Now, today's video is a bit different from our usual videos. If you missed the season 1, episode 1 breakdown, be sure to go back and take a look at that video so that you can be all caught up. I think that I may just do a season 1 recap and just focus on season 2. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so that you can get notifications of when I upload new content here on the channel. Today, we are going to break down episode 3 of season 2 titled Head to Head. Oscar Wilde once said, "Women are made to be loved, not understood." This quote perfectly captures the essence of the women in our lives, and it seems fitting that Wilde himself makes an appearance in this episode of The Gilded Age. Perhaps he was inspired by the intriguing characters we've come to adore in our beloved show. But before we delve into Wilde's journey to New York, let's take a moment to appreciate these enigmatic women who captivate our hearts, even if we can't fully comprehend them. Carrie Coon's performance as Bertha Russell in The Gilded Age is truly remarkable. What stands out the most is the unwavering strength she exudes in every situation. Whether it's dealing with her children friends or even her bitter rivals, Bertha remains composed and hardly ever backs down. It's astonishing to witness the transformation of a character who we never thought would stoop to groveling, especially not to her former lady's maid. Yet here we are witnessing a shift in her unbreakable facade, as fear creeps in, threatening her social standing and merit. Miss Turner, the lady's maid, had made it clear to everyone that she would make a comeback, despite being fired from the Russell household last season. However, nobody could have anticipated the grandeur of her return. Since leaving the Russells, she managed to marry into a higher social class. Rumor has it that she wrote a flattering letter to the wealthy Mr. Winterton and possibly even seduced him, just as she had tried to seduce George Russell. The question remains, though, does Mr. Winterton even know about her past as a servant? Bertha, relying on the support of New York's elite to fund the new Metropolitan Opera House, had hoped that the new Mrs. Winterton would be on her side. Unfortunately, she was gravely mistaken. Theodora has now left Newport and returned to New York to host a tea party for potential benefactors of the Met. The awkward twist is that the new Mrs. Winterton is now a guest in the very home she used to serve. Bertha discreetly warns her butler Church about Winterton's arrival, instructing him not to show any surprise. While Church manages to keep his composure, the same cannot be said for the lady's maid, Adelheid. She rushes back to the servants' quarters, frantically announcing Winterton's presence as if she were Paul Revere on steroids, shouting, "She's here! She's here!" to anyone who will listen. And to make matters even more shocking, Winterton, or should I say Turner, is now a wealthy wife. Wake up, this is America. You can be anything you want. I should know, chuckles Josh Borden, the chef from Kansas who pretended to be French. During the tea gathering, Bertha makes a surprising announcement that sets the stage for an epic clash between the Met and the Academy of Music. As she hoped to win over some of the Academy's patrons, Bertha suggests the idea of having a box at both venues. However, fate has other plans. The conflicting season opening dates force everyone to pick a side, leaving no room for neutrality. While discussing this predicament with Mamie Fish, Mrs. Winterton approaches Bertha with a snide remark. She declares that she has no intention of taking a box at the Met, implying that Bertha's desperate attempts to be on their list were in vain. Bertha, aware of her hidden connection with Mrs. Winterton, must swallow the insult silently, realizing that she is no longer the most cunning woman in New York. As Mrs. Fish excuses herself, Bertha drops her facade and confides in her lady's maid, acknowledging that the tables have turned since their last encounter. She seeks her support, but Mrs. Winterton responds with a cool demeanor, questioning if Bertha is threatening to expose her. Bertha, being clever and strategic, knows better than to resort to 1883's version of doxing her nemesis. She reassures Mrs. Winterton that she has no intention of causing trouble. However, Winter takes it a step further, suggesting that Bertha consult George before stirring up any commotion. Wow, someone had a bit of a meow mix this morning. The mention of George and the revelation that he never disclosed their connection leaves Bertha stunned, realizing that she has been deceived and outmaneuvered. Bertha has been completely unaware of the scandalous incident involving Turner showing up naked in George's bed last year. To his credit, George never acted on her advances. However, when George finally confesses to Bertha that Turner did try to seduce him, she becomes furious. "You never told me," Bertha accuses George. "There was nothing to tell," he replies. But by keeping this information from Bertha, George has broken her trust. "You allowed me to be attended to have my hair styled, my clothes chosen, my bath prepared by a woman who had been intimate with my husband. I consider that a betrayal," she cries, and thus begins her prolonged silent treatment. Ethan may seem overly dramatic with her first world problems. Some of us have to take care of our own baths, but this is just how things are in the world of Julian Fellows. Even when the stakes are low, they have the power to destroy you. It's difficult to imagine what would have happened if George had actually acted on Turner's advances. All of this happens at a time when George desperately needs Bertha's support to convince Mr. Henderson, the union leader from Pittsburgh who represents George's steel and iron workers, not to lead his men into a strike. George is prepared to bribe Henderson into submission, and he relies on Bertha to charm him during their meeting at their home. Unfortunately for George, no amount of charm can sway Henderson's principles, and he firmly states that he cannot be bought and will not waver in his support for the union. In Newport, Larry Russell continues his work on Mrs. Susan Blaine's home renovation, all while indulging in some intimate moments with her. Mrs. Blaine is a woman who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to have a little fun. As she straddles Larry, she expresses her desire to enjoy the summer without any consequences. Finally, we have a character in the Gilded Age who embodies sex-positive feminism. It's refreshing to see someone like Mrs. Blaine, especially after the scandalous Mrs. Chamberlain, played by Jean Triplehorn, who faced society's judgment for her affair with a married man. Barry, on the other hand, is fully embracing this exciting romance with Mrs. Blaine, although he can't help but wonder if they should be more discreet. She reassures him that there's nothing to worry about, but I can't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Something tells me there will be consequences after all. While Bertha is confident in her ability to win the opera war, her friend Mr. McAllister isn't so convinced. Mr. McAllister is known for playing with fire, so it's no surprise when he attends Bertha's tea promoting the Met, only to later conspire against her with Astor at the Van Ryans. Miss Astor wants Agnes to send letters to their friends who have boxes at the Academy, warning them that their membership will be revoked if they also take a box at the Met. And when McAllister informs them that the Met plans to open on the same night as the Academy, they see it as a direct challenge and become even more determined to crush Bertha's opera house like a bug. As Agnes's secretary, Peggy is tasked with writing these letters. However, Peggy is already occupied with her job at the Globe. Her boss T, Thomas Fortune E, reluctantly invites her to join him at Booker T, Washington's home in Tuskegee, Alabama. They are there to commemorate the opening of a dormitory at the Tuskegee Institute. This invitation poses a challenge as it is uncommon for an unmarried man and woman to travel together. Moreover, for a Black woman from the North to willingly venture into Jim Crow-era Alabama is extremely perilous. Peggy's mother, Dorothy, strongly opposes the idea. She warns Peggy that once she crosses the Mason-Dixon line, she will no longer be seen as human. Dorothy advises Peggy to avoid any interaction with white people, as even the slightest action could be misinterpreted. Peggy, however, feels frustrated by her mother's warnings and questions if she is being told to be subservient. While it may seem unlikely for Peggy to be ignorant of the realities of the South, she remains defiant. She is determined to go, regardless of the risk involved. After experiencing the loss of her child, this journey serves as a much-needed distraction for Peggy. It's like, girl, that is the South. Okay, they will string you up for just being blacking out at night with no reason to be needed. This actually happened to Black people. I get she is just trying to stay busy, but she also needs to know what the hell she is getting herself into. In the North, yeah, you get dirty looks from white people just like you did when you went into the Bloomingdale store of Marion. The South is like that, but 100 times worse. In the Van Ryn residence, Marion and her Aunt Ada find themselves on the brink of potential romantic endeavors. Marion's love interest happens to be her cousin-in-law, Dashiell Montgomery, while Aunt Ada's attention is captured by the Reverend Forday. Agnes decides to host a lunch for the entire group, unaware that clam chowder has been included on the menu as a nod to the Reverend's Boston heritage. Although Hale and Hardy's business revolves around serving soup for lunch, the upper class in 1883 would never consider such a meal. and the sight of the broth truly unsettles Agnes. However, this is Ada's way of flirting, and it appears to be working on the Reverend, who invites her to accompany him to an art exhibition featuring the works of a watercolorist they both admire, Adolf Menzies. Ada is aware that Agnes would disapprove, so she seeks Marian's assistance in slipping away unnoticed. Marian may not be the most exciting person, but I appreciate her willingness to challenge the established norms. So let's dive into the wild side of the show with the girls. It appears that the majority of the younger audience is present for the debut of Oscar Wilde's play, Vera, or The Nihilist, which had a short-lived run in New York back in 1883. The play received harsh criticism both in reality and on the show, which is likely why it remains relatively unknown. Despite the play being despised by everyone in attendance, they are still eagerly anticipating the chance to meet Wilde himself, whose witty remarks are on par with those of Agnes Van Ryn. As the night unfolds, love is in the air for Marian and Dashiell, Larry Russell and Mrs. Blaine, and Oscar Van Ryn and the enchanting Maud Beaton, who has just arrived from Paris. Oscar and Maud share a delightful banter, and her wealth certainly catches his eye, although his heart still yearns for John Adams. Interestingly enough, only Oscar Wilde can see through the facade and recognize the true nature of Oscar and John's relationship. While the city of New York is alive with excitement, back in Pittsburgh, Henderson and his comrades gather in a dimly lit room, plotting a strike. Henderson warns his fellow workers about the formidable George Russell, a man who will stop at nothing to crush. He predicts that Russell will attempt to bribe and divide them, urging them to be prepared to fight and even sacrifice their lives. The atmosphere is heavy with tension, intensified by the sorrowful expression on Henderson's wife's face as she hears his words. But it is a necessary prophecy. Henderson and his men are determined to stand up against Russell's oppressive capital. Despite his wealth, Russell's ruthless nature will not go unchallenged. During the opulent era of the Gilded Age, Oscar Wilde famously remarked after one of his visits to America, America is the only country that went from barbarism to decadence without civilization in between. It appears that, thanks to individuals like George Russell and his ilk, the decadence merely masked the underlying barbarism. Finally know why Watson is estranged from his daughter Flora. Watson used to be named Mr. Collier, and he was a successful banker until he went bankrupt. His wife's family forced them to divorce when he went broke, and he was cut out of his daughter's life. Robert McNeill, Flora's husband, makes him an offer in order to spare the McNeill family any shame of being affiliated with a servant. They'll bankroll Watson's life if only he'll shove off and move to California, never to speak to his daughter again. It's a tempting and cruel offer. He's one of Mrs. Winterton's friends, now that she's rich as the Duke of Buckingham. From England, the only thing Bertha can think to leverage her situation with Winterton is this Duke's visit to Newport, so she hatches a secret plan to meet him, and to do so, she needs George's help. If he's helpful enough, only then will Bertha forgive him for his past indiscretions. That's how this family operates, apparently. The shade, the drama, I'm here for it all. So tell me what you think of the episode. Till next time, take care of yourself.